Welcome. You're on the Fringe show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe is about our future, the future of science, technology, art, economy, and society. I help you to navigate the rapidly changing world and uncertain future so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities and make better decisions. In this episode, which is number 56, I decided to talk about Black Swans. Futurists and organizations practicing deep foresight often incorporate black swans in their future scenarios. Probably you know that it's a term coined by Nassim Taleb, who says that his profession is probability. The most interesting fact about these black swans is that so far there has been very little scientific and empirical basis for these events. And perhaps because of that, Black Swan has become sort of a cliché for any bad thing that surprises us. That's according to Taleb himself. But recent research has changed that, and this is what I want to talk about. I'll start with outlining what is our understanding of black swans, and then move on to this new research about how we can predict black swans and what's the scientific basis for this. So if you're an investor, entrepreneur, executive, a government official, or any other decision maker, that's probably an important show for you. There is a usual disclaimer that the views here are my own and they do not represent the official views of organizations and employers associated with. This is not investment advice. The information here is only for educational purposes. Now let's start as what is Black Swan? Perhaps you've heard about this many times, but the great baseball coach Yogi Berra once said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. We are trying here to make predictions about the future. The full title of the book that Nassim Taleb published is The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. Taleb is a very well-known expert. He's theoretician, practitioner, and philosopher on the issues of probabilities, risk, and uncertainty. And he's also an author of many bestsellers of philosophical and technical nature. And he's a very successful investment bank and investor and trader. So we could really have confidence in what he's saying. To him, the Black Swan has three main characteristics. It's an outlier. It's outside the realm of regular expectations because nothing in the past points to its possibility. It carries an extreme impact. And the third quality is, in spite of its outlier status, human nature makes us come up with an explanation for its occurrence after the fact, making it explainable and predictable. So we try to rationalize after the fact. To summarize, its rarity, extreme impact, and retrospective but not prospective predictability. And it is this combination of low predictability and large impact that makes the Black Swan such a great puzzle. The central idea in Taleb's book is really about our blindness with respect to randomness, particularly in large deviations. Why do we keep focusing on the minutiae? That's what Taleb is asking, and not the possible significant large events, in spite of the obvious evidence of their huge influence. And in some domains, such as scientific discovery or maybe venture capital investment, there is a disproportionately large payoff from the unknown, since you typically have little to lose and plenty to gain from such a rare event. And yet you can ask any portfolio manager whether they're incorporating these types of risks, Black Swan events, into their decision-making, into your portfolio. Well, it's probably not going to be the case. Taleb is particularly critical of how we learn and what we know. Black Swan logic makes what we don't know far more important than what you do know. That's according to Taleb. Next, we're excessively focused, according to him, on what we do know. We tend to learn the precise and not the general. And the problem lies in the structure of our minds. We don't learn rules. We prefer to learn facts and only facts. He makes a very strong point about the so-called bell curve probability distribution. And for those of you who may not be familiar what that means, the probability distribution is the model which is used to calculate the odds of different events and how they are distributed. When we say that an event is distributed according to the bell curve, we mean this Gaussian bell curve that can help provide probabilities of various events. And almost anything and everything in social life is produced by rare but consequential shocks. And yet almost everything that we study in social life and in social sciences, it typically focuses on the normal, on this bell curve distribution. And that's not very useful. Why? Because the bell curve cannot handle large deviations, and it makes us confident, nevertheless, that we have tamed uncertainty. He really drills down into why we're blind to black swans. That's because the human mind suffers from a number of ailments, or you can call them cognitive biases. Taleb calls that the triplet of opacity, and they include the illusion of understanding or how everything or everyone thinks he knows that what's going on in the world. And what actually goes on is far more complicated or random than we realize. Then there is a retrospective distortion of how we can assess matters only after the fact, as if they were really very obvious to us. And then there is this overvaluation of factual information, particularly when we create categories. And categories, instead of complex laws and categories, simplify reality. You don't need to go very far. Look at newspapers, TV, politics, and it's getting worse and worse as the same information gets repeated many times and reinforces some facts while continuing to ignore black swan possibilities. This approach is actually producing some black swans because they're hiding them from you or from our discussions so that there is no probability associated with them and they are simply ignored. The two interesting questions are, well, why do black swans come? We partially kind of answered this question, and where do they come from? But let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. Why do black swans come? Well, because we're ignorant, and arrogant about what we know. We certainly know a lot, but we have a built-in tendency to think that we know a little bit more than we actually do. In other words, you can think about it as the stock of our knowledge, what we know because of progress, because of the amount of information around us is growing very fast. But our overconfidence in that knowledge is even faster. And he calls this particular phenomenon or cognitive bias epistemic arrogance, literally our hubris concerning the limits of our knowledge. And this epistemic arrogance, according to Taleb, produces a double effect. First, we overestimate what we know, and second, we underestimate uncertainty by compressing the range of possible uncertain states or by reducing the space of the unknown. Let's just give us a little example here, a very trivial example from common life. Almost all people who want to get married know that the statistic between is 1/3 to about 1/2. All of these marriages fail. And sometimes the parties involved did not forecast that when they were trying to tie the knot. And of course, they would be thinking, well, it's not us because we get along so well, we will never do that, and so on and so forth. So it's clearly underestimating the uncertainty. And the second question is, where do black swans come from? And they're coming from a process which Taleb calls emergence. It's better explained in his other work, which is Skin in the Game. Emergence is like a qualitative leap in the complexity of a system. The main idea behind complex system, it is that it is a collection of properties, and this collection behaves in ways which cannot be predicted by its components. And these elements can be absolutely anything. They can be particles of matter, human beings. It can apply to car parts, and emergence is present in any system. It can be biological, financial markets, social systems, and so on. And the interactions between between the elements, the components of these systems, matter a lot more than the nature of the units themselves. So parts and the whole differ because what matters are interactions between these parts. And these interactions may obey simple rules. Some of the rules, just an example, is the minority rule. It's sufficient for a minority, say 3 to 4% of the population with significant skin in the game, to reach a small level, and then the entire population will have to submit to their preferences. A new self-emergent property of the system is really unpredictable, or as we say, emergent. And black swans, it's exactly where black swans emerge from, this unpredictability. The most important idea, I believe, in Taleb's work is that, unfortunately, in emerging social, economic, and political systems, the law governing a transformative transition from one state to another are not yet known. We don't know the rules, we don't know the laws, there's no theory for that. And that's what we call epistemic uncertainty. And unless we figure these laws out, black swans will continue to visit us. Their emergence cannot be predicted, either by prediction agencies, futurists, or whoever on this planet. Let's go back to a couple of definitions from Nassim Taleb about black swans. He says it's an outlier, it's outside the realm of regular expectations, but it's interesting to ask the question, but what are these regular expectations? What is the range of them, right? Also, these are the events that carry an extreme impact, but how extreme? Do we know? Is there a metric for these extreme events? And until recently, a lot of discussions around black swans has been kind of philosophical or theoretical in nature. There was no empirical scientific basis, including in Taleb's work. It's a very well maybe thought about theoretically, but not so much empirical basis. That changed. There is a recent article that I'm referring to, and it's called Quantifying the Unexpected, a Scientific Approach to Black Swans, which was released by a group of Italian researchers, and it's published in Physical Review Research just recently in 2022. It's in the public domain, and I will leave a link to this article for you to browse if you're interested in it. They're starting by saying that many natural and socioeconomic systems are characterized by power law distributions that make the occurrence of extreme events not negligible. And such events are typically referred to as black swans, but quantifiable or quantitative definition of a black swan is still lacking. Policymakers and business people are improperly using this terminology according to them. For instance, during the last months, many governments, many financial institutions and journals and magazines identified the COVID-19 pandemic as a black swan. But the possibility of the spread of this newborn virus had already been pointed out by many different studies, including by Taleb himself. Most of the discussion, as we mentioned, is still very much qualitative, philosophical, or psychological, but it's not firmly empirically based. A central property of black swans is that they cannot be predicted from data about the system under consideration. You also need to consider how the system is embedded into the larger environment, how it is coupled with this environment. And this includes whether there are jumps in the upper cutoff of the power law distribution. I understand that that's getting a little bit technical, but bear with me. I think that's the implications that are more important than the technicalities and standard techniques. The research framework that they've adopted is the Zipf's-Mandelbrot's law, and according to them, many extreme phenomena such as Earthquakes, wars, disasters, and pandemics have complex inherent structures and are power law distributed. So it's not about this bell curve distribution, a standard statistical technique, just like Taleb himself says. This cannot be applied. We need to apply power law distributions. The Zipf's law itself is very well familiar to entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. That's how we value networks, or it's a scaling law found in many natural and socioeconomic systems. What they've done, what the empirical data and the empirical basis for their work are 14 different systems. I'll give you just some examples of that, like wars before World War I, also wars before World War II. Terrorist attacks, airplane disasters, Dow Jones returns before 1987, as well as Dow Jones daily returns and so on. So Italian earthquakes were also there. So quite a few systems, 14 overall. And then within each system, they investigated a number of elements. For example, in pandemics, 35 elements, in airplane disasters, 859, and so on. So that differ depending on the system, of course. And all of these systems were power law distributed. There is a statistical procedure that helps you to identify what is a bell curve and what is not. I think what's more important is kind of the summary of the findings. Again, they can sound a little bit technical, but again, bear with me. So de Marza and his colleagues have delineated very strict mathematical boundaries of the ingredients that are necessary for the black swan to emerge. And that's their probably best and the foremost contribution. So there are three properties of black swans. It's an inherent truncated power law distribution. That's what statisticians would have called it. There is also a very high level of sampling. The level of sampling plays a crucial role in order to understand if an event is an outlier and not compatible with the upper cutoff of the distribution. We need an estimate of such cutoff. I'll give you a couple of examples. In the case of Italian earthquakes, the distribution is highly sampled. And so an earthquake releasing just 1.23 times the energy of the largest earthquake ever recorded would be a black swan. If we look at the distribution of Dow Jones index daily returns, for example, they are undersampled. And so any fluctuation, no matter how large, could not be a black swan. At best, it will be probably a gray swan. Their second finding was second characteristic or property of black swans was there is a jump dynamics of the upper cutoff. They give an example of Turkish airline flight 981 disaster. It was a clear-cut example where such a dynamics is particularly evident, and the jump of the upper cutoff has been provoked by a very well-defined technological advance, the introduction of large body aircrafts. One of their findings, significant finding, is that they're actually quantified the measure of the surprise associated with large events, what they called the blackness. And this blackness helps us to classify all these so-called black swan events actually into three distinct categories: white swans, gray swans, and black swans. So not all of them are black swan events. And according to this classification, the First World War and 9/11 were indeed black swans, but the Second World War and the Black Monday of 1987 were not. They were gray swans. They also gave an example of a stylized black swan, which corresponds pretty much to the Turkish Airlines flight 981 disaster. 346 people died in that circumstance, subverting the estimate of the upper cutoff, which at the time was approximately 200. And using this parameter, which really depends only on empirical quantities, they also checked the stationary power laws. Stationary power laws are those that don't have any jumps in the upper cutoff limit. And these ones produce only gray swans. They also determined how large various effects could be considered as black swans by estimating these upper cutoffs of the inherent power law distribution. So according to them, according to this research, COVID-19 is not a black swan, and any pandemic, and these are very interesting figures here, any pandemic they estimated to be black swan should kill 40 times more the Black Death. The Black Death killed 200 million, and that would have been 5 billion people plus. And only a few pandemics have been recorded in human history, and so the inherent distribution is not so much sampled. If you look at Dow Jones index daily returns, they're completely undersampled, and in these systems, any event, no matter how large, can only be a grey swan. They also spotted a new example of black swans, or some new examples, such as Turkish airline disaster. And Burj Khalifa, for those of you who live in Dubai, is also considered to be a black swan. Its emergence could not have been predicted by various people. So that's kind of the summary of their findings. And I think the big conclusion from that, even if you don't understand statistics, is that, yes, it can be quantified. We know what black swans should look like. There are mathematical boundaries for that. And we can actually incorporate these types of events in our decision-making and scenario planning. And so, one of the questions, why should we bother? And according to futurist Karelov, we're already entering the zone of singularity, and I'm referring here to Kurzweil's singularity, which is another hyped concept with little theoretical underpinning. And unpredictability and emergence are growing as a result of rising technological and social complexity. So we can almost argue that black swans appear to be becoming a new law of nature. And this means that this predictability of many critical processes is lost, and black swans are becoming more and more typical and almost ordinary phenomena of the global civilization. Well, this is a bit contentious, but I think it has its merits, this argument. So the black swan, just to remind ourselves, is really a great puzzle because of a combination of low predictability and very large impact. The introduction of this quantitative criterion, which was done by Demars and the colleagues, is very useful from a practical point of view. You need to keep black swans and scenario thinking a strategic planning toolkit. It's not necessarily a negative scenario. It can be a very, very positive scenario for you, which will produce outsized returns. Black swans demand an approach that explicitly takes uncertainty into account, rather than we just pretend it doesn't exist. We need to give up this search for accurate and detailed prediction of the future, because it's not possible, it's not useful, and is really very misleading. And scenario planning are a very good way of thinking about our future incorporating black swans. Scenario thinking typically asks two questions. What are the variables of critical importance to my future? And if these change as a result of some event, for whatever reason, what are you going to do about it? So scenario thinking assumes a variety of future states, and they can be either positive or negative. And you can almost certainly look at positive black swans as well. You need to ask yourself the question, do we depend too much on this bell curve thinking? We're ignoring deviations, we're ignoring power laws, and scenarios, by the way, are not about probability. And the last takeaway is for us humans, everyone on this planet, look for personal biases like illusion of understanding or epistemic arrogance, literally our hubris concerning the limits of our knowledge. Also, look for biases amongst experts. There is a joke about gorillas that suggests that the average accuracy of expert predictions is roughly equivalent to a gorilla playing darts. Empirical studies also supported that. They said that expert predictions are equivalent to random guesses. So next time you hear on the views, experts believe, experts say that, experts have said and made this pronouncement or that pronouncement, run away. Be very, very critical and suspicious of experts. Anyway, I think you hope you found this show useful. Now you know a little bit more about black swans, hopefully, and how they can be quantified. And I certainly refer you to this interesting, very short article, but quite very well executed. So quantifying the unexpected, the scientific approach to black swans. And I will see you next Friday, 2 p.m. Dubai time. Thank you so much for joining me. And bye-bye for now.